So this morning what I want us to do is I want us to take a look at sin. Normally when we take a look at sin, we think about how our sin affects us, and it certainly does. We certainly think about how it affects our relationship with the Lord, and it certainly does. But this morning I want to focus on how our sin affects those people that we love. How our sin affects other people, especially the people that we love. And I want to begin by asking you a question that I ask all my ethics classes in college every semester. I like to start off by saying, do you think that what consenting adults do behind closed doors is their own business? Do you think what consenting adults do behind closed doors is their own business? Now, when I ask them that question and they all start talking and they all go, yeah, sure, you know what consenting adults do, it's none of our business, we can't tell them, blah, blah, blah. And then when they're done and they quiet down, I say, well, the reason you say that is because you're thinking about sex. But let me just give you an example. Suppose you're in a condo or you're in an apartment and you're living next to two young men or two attractive young ladies, and they're terrorists. And they're mixing bombs in their apartment. They're making bombs in their condo. And they make a mistake one day and they blow the whole condo up and they kill everybody. You still think that what consenting adults do behind closed doors is their own business? Folks, our morality, our ethics is never, never, never only a personal thing. It always has social consequences. All the time. There is nothing that you can do that doesn't affect other people. Now I know you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, oh yeah, really? Well, how about the clothes I wore today? Who's that affecting? Hey, if a woman comes in here with a really short skirt, you don't think that's going to affect people? If a fellow comes in here all disheveled, looking like a slob and hasn't taken a shower in a week, you don't think that's going to affect people? If you don't brush your teeth in the morning and you have stinky breath all day long, you don't think that that affects people? There is nothing that you can do that doesn't affect other people. And we're going to look at a perfect illustration of this. It's actually a very sad story. It's actually a very tragic story in Joshua chapter 7 about a fellow by the name of Achan, okay? But before we get there, I want you to just think for a moment, okay, about how our behavior can affect other people. You get involved in drugs and alcohol, okay? You get involved in financial irregularities in your company and you lose your job. You are an abusive husband or an abusive father. Do you know how that affects your family? Because when we sin, the people who are affected the most are the people that we love the most, because they're the closest to us. And sometimes the things that we do to them takes years of counseling to get over, and sometimes, you know what? They never get over it. They never get over it. So as we look at this story, just think about how your sin might affect other people, okay? So let's go to Joshua chapter 7. We're talking now about Israel beginning to conquer the promised land. I know you like pictures. Let's go to the video here. Conquest of Canaan. Show the first one. So this is the route that Israel took to get to the promised land. By the way, a lot of controversial theories on where they came. I happen to believe they crossed over right on the bottom there. There's a wonderful book by a fellow named Howard Bloom called The Gold of Exodus. If you're interested in this, you ought to read that book. Okay? But what they do is they go down, they cross over into Midian, and then they go up and they come into the promised land. Go to the next slide. They actually come into the promised land from the east to the west. Okay? They're on the east side of the promised land. You can see that arrow right in the middle where they're going to start traveling to the west. Okay? So they have finished their wanderings in the desert, if you will. Remember when they were about ready to take the promised land, there was a generation that didn't believe that they could, remember? And the Lord said, well, none of you are going to enter the promised land. They have all died. Moses has died. The leadership of Israel has transferred over now to Joshua. They've crossed the Jordan River, that little arrow right in the middle. They're crossing the Jordan River, and they in chapter 7, they have already fought the Battle of Jericho. That's chapter 6. We're going to look at that real quick, okay? So they fought the Battle of Jericho, and as you know, Jericho was a major city, high fortified walls, considered by the Canaanites to be indestructible. Nobody is ever going to take Jericho. And you know from chapter 6 what happens, the story of Jericho. They follow the Lord. They do exactly what the Lord wants them to do, and they destroy Jericho. Okay? Go to the next slide. This is a mount of Jericho as it exists today. That's an aerial photograph of it. Go to just one more. This, by the way, is the promised land when we're all said and done, how it's all divided up among the different tribes. Just so you can see kind of the end plan that is going to happen. Okay? All right, we're done with the slides. So they defeat Jericho. You remember Rahab, the prostitute who was faithful to the Lord and faithful to his people. We're going to contrast her with Achan, who's the fellow that gets into trouble in chapter 7, okay? But look at Joshua chapter 6 for just a moment. Look at verses 18 and 19, a warning from the Lord before they attack Jericho. But keep away from the devoted things so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble upon it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. So they're warned. We're going to go ransack. We're going to destroy a tremendous city. There's a lot of valuables in there. Don't take any of them. Put them in the treasury of the Lord. Do exactly what I say, okay? So the fall of Jericho takes place. Amazing victory. Amazing victory. They did what the Lord wanted them to do. And you know what happens? Their reputation is throughout Canaan. All of the Canaanites are fearful of them. If they can take Jericho, there's no stopping them. There must be something very special about these Israelites and their God. We can't believe that they destroyed Jericho. So their reputation begins to expand far and wide, not only about them, but also about their God. It also builds up their self-esteem. It also builds up their confidence in the Lord, right? Here's this tremendous city. I mean, this is the most difficult battle we're going to fight. If we can win that battle, nothing's going to be able to stop us. Now, just as a side note, I could let this slide, but I'm not going to. As you're reading the fall of Jericho, look at verse 21. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, old and young, cattle and sheep and donkeys. Verse 24, they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and the gold and the articles of the bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord. So now you're thinking about this and you're going, wait a minute, women and children and animals? How could God tell them to do that? Folks, you have to understand that God works on many different levels simultaneously. First of all, as Israel is entering into the promised land, this is a fulfillment of a promise that God gave to Abraham 400 years earlier. Read it in Genesis chapter 12 through 15. Okay? So what is going on as Israel is conquering and taking over this land? It is a fulfillment of God's promise that he made to Abraham. All right? So that's one level. God is always faithful to his promises. If you read Joshua 21 verse 45, it says, not one of the promises, the good promises the Lord had made to the house of Israel failed. Everyone was fulfilled. So God fulfills his promises. But there's another level that people forget about today. You know, the hubris of our generation. We look back on things that happened years ago and we go, oh, how could they do such a terrible thing? They're not as enlightened as we are. Well, let me just tell you something. God is using Israel as his instrument of judgment against the Canaanite people who were exceedingly sinful. Not only your regular, average, everyday pagan worship. They incorporated sexual immorality into their pagan worship. They practiced child sacrifice as part of their pagan worship. They were exceedingly evil. And so God is using Israel to punish them. And now you may say, yeah, but what about the women? What about the children? What about the animals? You know, there's a biblical principle you ought to get used to hearing about. The sins of the father will be visited upon their children. The sins of the father will be visited upon their children. Now, in Joshua chapter 7, it's a rather stark, brutal visitation. I will grant you that. But it's a principle that still holds true today. You're a father, you have a family, you do something you shouldn't be doing at work, and you get fired. What happens? You lose your job. You have to move to the other side of the country to get another job. What happens to your children? You have to pull them out of school. They lose all their friendships. What about your wife's friends? Well, you see you later. I got to go with my husband to the other side of the country. What about that big, beautiful house you used to live in? Kids don't get to live there anymore. The sins of the father will be visited upon their children. It's a biblical principle. The sins that we commit will affect our families. It's plain and simple. Now, they destroy Jericho. Okay, fine. Let's go to the next battle. This is chapter 7. Little town called Ai. Hey, little puny little town, a little bit north of Jericho. No problem. Joshua sends out scouts. The scouts come back, and what do they say? Well, look at this. Chapter 7, verses 2 through 4. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Bethaven, east of Bethel, and told them, go up and spy out the region. So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, not all the people have to go up against Ai. Send only 2,000 or 3,000 men. That should do it. Don't weary all the people, for only a few men are there. So about 3,000 men went up. Okay, you got the idea? Big battle, Jericho, tough battle. Didn't know if they were going to win. Faithful to the Lord, they crush them. Now we have a puny little battle over here. We don't need the whole army. They send them out. What happens? They're routed. They're defeated. They're defeated. Look at verses 4 and 5. But they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted and became like water. Now, before we get to the reason why this happened, think about the effects that this has. Because it's the effect of one man and his sinfulness. 36 Israelites die. They had children. They had wives. They had parents. They had brothers and sisters. 36 men died. That's at least several hundred people who are directly implicated or affected by what's happened, right? Okay? And then we find out, what about the national disgrace? Their hearts are melted. All that self-confidence that they had, gone. Gee, maybe we're not indestructible. They start questioning the Lord. I don't know, is the Lord really with us? I mean, he seemed to be with us in Jericho, but how could we lose against a puny little town like Ai? What about the effect that it has on the Canaanite people? Now the Canaanite nation is going, hey, wait a minute. Maybe Jericho was just a fluke, right? Okay, maybe they're not so indestructible. Maybe we can defeat them. Do you see all of the things that happen because they ended up getting defeated? Now look at how Joshua reacts. Look at verses 6 through 9. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell down on the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there until evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring the people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites and destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us, and they will wipe out your name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name? Questioning the Lord? Questioning the faithfulness of the Lord? Did you bring us here to destroy us? Why weren't we satisfied on the other side of the Jordan? Oh, wait a minute, Joshua, let me get this straight. You mean not take the promised land? What are you, crazy? Do you see what's happening? Because of this defeat. Now, let's get to the moral of the story. Why the defeat? Look at verse 1. But the Israelites acted unfaithfully in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zimri, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them, and so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Why did they lose? Because they weren't faithful to the Lord. Folks, we lose when we're not faithful to the Lord. Here's the sin of one man destroying the whole national reputation. One man. Okay? Now, I personally love the way the Lord deals with this. Look at verses 10 through 12. The Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them in their own possession. This is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They have turned their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with anyone unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction." You can imagine the Lord saying, "Hey, Joshua, you little crybaby, get up. Be a man. What are you talking about? Why do you think you got defeated? Why don't you stop and think for a moment? When you do what I say, what happens? You win. When you lose, obviously why? You didn't do what I said." It's almost like the Lord is angry with Joshua. He's not comforting him. So here's what we're going to do. Look at verse 13. Go, consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. That which is devoted among you, O Israel, you cannot stand against your enemies until you remove it. What's God going to do? He's going to deal with the sin. He's going to deal with the sin. What should we do? Deal with the sin. Don't make excuses. As we confessed, and I read some passages to you out of Scripture, right? Admit that you're sinful, all right? Stand before the Lord and take the punishment that He's going to give you, and then move on. Okay? Admit that you're sinful. Now let's think about this, okay? Why do things not turn out the way we want them to sometimes? I'm sure you've thought about that. I'm sure you've thought about that. You want the job. You want the promotion. You don't get the promotion. You little crybaby like Joshua. Why didn't you get the promotion? Maybe you're not the best worker in the company. Maybe you're lazy. Maybe you're late for work. Maybe you're involved in dissension in the company, and the bosses can see that. Do you understand what's going on? When we work, we are supposed to work for who first? For the Lord first. We are supposed to be the best workers in the company, okay? So when we don't get the job, 10 to 1, think about it. How about we don't have the kind of relationships in our life that we want? Gee, I don't have the kind of relationships with people that I want. Yeah, well, maybe you're selfish. Maybe you're arrogant. Maybe you're untruthful. Maybe you're unreliable. Maybe you're always in it for yourself. Gee, I wonder why you don't have the kind of relationships that you want. Maybe you're in financial difficulties. Can't ever seem to make ends meet. Really? Well, maybe you're not following biblical principles of finance. Living beyond your means. Buying things that you shouldn't be buying. Maybe you don't have the right kind of job. You're out of place. Maybe you're not working hard enough in your job to get those promotions that we just talked about. My point is very simple. If things aren't going the way you want them to, take a look inside yourself before you start accusing anybody. Because the chances are we're not living the kind of life that the Lord wants us to live. When are we going to learn that when we follow biblical principles in our lives, it is in our own best interest? If I can't appeal to your sense of devotion to the Lord, let me appeal to your selfishness. It is in your selfish interest to follow biblical principles in your life. They are the best thing for you. They are the best thing for you. So now we get to the Lord's plan. Look at verses 14, 15. I'll just summarize them. What does the Lord say? Okay, tomorrow I want all Israel before me. Okay? I'm going to call the tribe. You have the tribes. I'm going to call the tribe. Out of the tribe, I'm going to call the clan. Out of the clan, I'm going to call the family. And out of the family, I'm going to call the individual person who is in fact guilty. And what happens? This fellow by the name of Achan is found out. Look at verses 20 to 23. Because here's where he confesses. It is true, I have sinned against the Lord and the God of Israel. This is what I have done. So this is what he did that precipitated the defeat at Ai. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylon, He did it for a robe. 200 shekels of silver. He did it for silver. A wedge of gold weighing 50 shekels. He did it for gold. I coveted them, and I took them, and he put them in his tent, and he buried them, and so on and so forth. Now, I want you to just stop for a moment and think about how utterly ridiculous what he did. Not that he just violated what the Lord told him not to do. Folks, Israel is in the middle of a 30-year war. They're taking over the promised land. They're going to be fighting battles every single day, right? They're a mobile tribe that's conquering people. Where are you going to spend this stuff? There's no Amazon. You can't call up Amazon Prime. Hey, can I have that flat screen TV? There's no cell phones. There's no electronics. There's no cars. Yeah, I want that Mercedes. I got 50 shekels of gold. Come on, give me the Mercedes that I want. Are you out of your mind, Achan? You're not even going to get a chance to spend this stuff. Plus, you got to lug it around in your tent, put it on your horse, your camel, your donkey, whatever, every time the nation moves. It's totally ridiculous. It's absolutely, totally ridiculous. Oh, no. I'm going to hold it until we settle down, and then I'm going to spend it. Oh, really? Your whole nation has just come out of, 30, 40 years of war, and all of a sudden, hey, how come Achan's got the best house on the block? How come he's got all this stuff and we don't? I bet you he stole stuff from Jericho. You can't get away with it. You can't get away with it. So let me ask you this. Is that attractive woman that you see in your office all the time, is having an affair with her really worth it? Is it really worth it? Is putting that bet down that is all the money you saved for your family vacation in the summer, is putting that bet down and the exhilaration you get from, is that really worth it? Is being angry with that person that did something to you so long ago you can't even remember exactly what it was, but I know that I don't like them. Is holding that grudge and asking for revenge, is that really worth it? Is taking something that isn't yours really worth it? Maybe you'll get a little short-term pleasure, but believe me, in the long run, the price you're going to have to pay is not worth it. Bernie Madoff, $50 billion. What would you do for $50 billion? He ends up in jail. His wife divorced him. His son commits suicide because he can't stand all of the bad reputation he has. Is that worth it? It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Now, you can read the punishment in verses 24 through 26. I'll summarize it. They take Achan, his whole family, all of his possessions, all of his animals, and they stone him to death. And then they burn him. Pretty harsh. Yeah, it is pretty harsh. The sins of the father will be visited upon their children. Happens even today. Now, final thought. I don't want to leave you on that note. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1 says this. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore them gently, but watch yourselves so that you also may not be tempted. Okay? So now I want to shift a little bit. We've been focusing upon our own sin and how our sin is going to affect other people, and I hope you get the point. It certainly will. But what about if we know that someone we love is involved in sin? What should we do? What should we do? So I just want to share some thoughts about that. First of all, you have to earn the right to be able to talk to them. You ever hear that saying, people don't care what you know until they know that you care? Don't be holier than thou. Don't be seeing somebody that you don't know and go up to them and confront them. No, you don't do that. You want to confront people? You do it with the people that you know and love and the people that you have earned the right to talk to. That's first of all. The second thing we want to do, of course, is we want to love them. We want to love them no matter what they're involved in. It doesn't matter what they're, child pornography. I'll pick the worst thing you could probably think. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You have to love them. That whole thing, love the sinner and not the sin. I know sometimes it's all mixed up. It's hard to do that, right? Fine. You got to love that person, though. If they're a son or a daughter, or a spouse or a parent or a brother and a sister, there is absolutely no substitute for loving them. The next thing you want to do, though, folks, is very important, and that is you always, always want to give them biblical advice. You must give them biblical advice. That is their way out. If they're not a Christian, witness to them. They have to accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior. There's no getting around that. But you have to give them biblical advice. And if you're not sure about what you might have to say to them or might want to say to them, come and see me, come and see the elders. That's our job, is to give you advice on how you should approach these kinds of things. But you have to focus on biblical advice. Forget this pop psychology baloney. Follow biblical principles all the time. God's word is powerful. But the next thing you have to do is you have to be faithful to Christ. You personally have to be faithful to Christ. Don't be confronting somebody about their sin and giving them biblical advice, and then you don't show up to church on Sunday. They're going to know you're a hypocrite. You've just lost all your credibility. Forget it. They're not going to listen to you anymore. And by the way, you know the bad things that we do affect people in negative ways? The good things we do affect people in positive ways. They see you being faithful, reading your Bible, being involved in ministries, attending your church, tithing, all these things. It's going to have a positive effect on them. The next thing you can do, of course, is you should pray for them. I mean, we're talking about people that we know and we love who are involved in some very, very serious sin. First thing you do when you get up in the morning is you lift them up in prayer. The last thing you do when you go to bed at night is you lift them up in prayer. And every time in between that you have an opportunity to, you're getting out of your car and you're walking to your office and you're in the parking lot, say a prayer for them. It's an easy thing to do, isn't it? Yeah, but we don't seem to do it as much as we should. Prayer is very, very powerful. And then, of course, you want to forgive them. You want to forgive them. You have to forgive them. You love them. You have to forgive them. Now, this part says, but watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. 2 points to that. Number one, don't think you're better than they are, because you're not. Right? Satan is going to tempt us with what? Pride. Oh, I would never do that. I would never be involved in child pornography. That's horrible. That's disgusting. Well, guess what? Your lies, your taking stuff that doesn't belong to you, your judgmental attitude, your anger, your gossip is just as bad as that. Do you understand that in the eyes of the Lord? I know in society it's not the same. In the eyes of the Lord, all sin is equal. There's no levels of sin. The wage of sin is death. Doesn't matter. The wage of sin is death. Don't ever think that you're better than them, because you're not. But the last point I want to make is, and that is this. Don't pry too deeply. You don't want to get caught up in all of the details. You don't need to know the details. You don't need to know too much information. You know what you need to know? You need to know biblical principles that you can help them with. Okay? Because your goal should not be to find out as much information about them as you can. Who cares? You know they're involved in the sin. That's enough. I don't need to know anything else. I just want to deal with the solution. The biblical principles and helping them get to the place where they need to get to. Okay? So in conclusion, what do we want to do? Number one, always remember that your sin is going to affect other people. And the people that it's going to affect the most happen to be the people that you love the most. And when you realize that somebody you love is involved in some difficult situation, some different sin, whatever the case may be, try to give them biblical principles that will help them, because ultimately that's what we want to do. Amen?